I'm probably gonna be the last person to review this episode before the next one drops, but I really wanted to get my thoughts out there for what I deem to be one of the best episodes in the entire show. You heard me. So without further ado, let's go! Boo. I just came back from my daycare, I'm really sleepy. Now, as someone who never really got into Dark Souls lore, I found the breakdown really interesting. Great work on the editing, it felt like a mix between the usual comic book style and the start of a good Shrek film. The transition after initial introduction was also really nice. The story itself, I know it's in the title, but it gets dark, my god. I was aware of memes such as the legendary Roar and Praise the Sun, so they definitely add me when they reference them, but those are honestly some of the few elements of humor present in otherwise rather serious analysis. Not even a cutaway gag. I knew that Dark Souls is a game famously associated with unrelenting and determined players in the face of seemingly impossible odds, but I did not know that was a theme in the story itself. The dark fantasy aspects relate to the undead, dragons, monsters, magic system, gods, hell, even time travel at some point. Either they did a great job at making Dark Souls sound interesting, it always been interesting, or both. Probably both. Both is good. The whole deal with the chosen undead fighting an ultimately fruitless, useless battle in a never-ending cycle, making their efforts less about the goal but about the journey to get there, and how the analysis ended, it's very emotionally compelling stuff. And I never expected to use that term to describe what's usually an amusing info dump on average. Now, while the Dark Souls section ends on such a grim note that not even Boomstick will make a quip or joke, the Skyrim breakdown opens with him referencing the series' most famous meme, a contrast I believe works perfectly to convey the differences between the two series. Don't get me wrong, they're both dark fantasy epics, but Skyrim is much more silly about it, especially in comparison. Hence why the narration starts with Thomas the Tank Engine and not the end of mankind. There's much more humor too, whether the show roster were on screen or not, and I did get a nostalgic vibe whether the latter happened. But either way, I think pretty much every single joke landed. One in particular, the one cutaway joke that they do end up making, not only makes me smirk or chuckle, but it just makes me laugh. The sheer horror and Broomstick reaction when he realizes Witz doesn't have a soul to absorb. Always not something in your face that's, "You don't have a soul!" Best Boomstick impression, everyone. Was generally hilarious. Same where Witz fixes his glasses without skipping a beat, which was also a mix of hilarious and chilling given his nature as a mad scientist, which I don't think has been focused on too much recently. Come on, even Dr. Flug got a moment of non-goofy mad scienciness for once. One thing that I think didn't land though is how they introduced Dovahkiin verbatim to the famous trailer and not have the bit at the end with a Fusrada.
In their tongue, he is Dovahkiin, Dragonborn.
In their tongue, you are the Dovahkiin, Dragonborn.
In their quest to rid Tamriel of Alduin's dragon army, the Dragonborn became a
I get it, copyright, but come on, not even Avatar blueballed me like that. Despite the differences, both breakdowns ultimately focus more on the lore and character stuff rather than calculations. All in all, the episode honestly has some of the best humor on one end and one of the best answers on the other, so let's see if the fight itself completes this trinity of goodness. It does, my god it does.
Hey, Wiz, did you know that I can blow up a galaxy?
What? How?
I signed up for
Did they run out of budget for the last animation?
If the last fight setup was a good idea and not conveyed in the best way, this episode has a very lore-centric one that I think works really well for both characters, if you understand what's going on. And I'm not 100% sure myself, unlike 1995, so bear with me for a bit. So, the Dark Soul analysis hinted at these two snakes, one who wants the first frame to keep going and one that wants it to die out. Both scenarios having different results in how to shape the world of Dark Souls as a whole, but technically neither more bad than the other. The voices at the beginning and the end of the fight give away that Dragonborn was sent out on a quest by Cat to stop the chosen undead.
Go and stop this fool who would let the flame burn the age of humans to ashes.
Wolfram tells the undead to protect the first flame.
The Ancients of Dark will do anything to snuff out the light. Save us, chosen undead.
Now I really like this, it feels natural and organic, even somewhat epic in a very my chosen one versus yours kind of way, as if two prophecies were colliding one another. In the context of Dark Souls, the The first flame isn't really what keeps the world going, it just gives power to the gods while burning the souls of mankind. It makes perfect sense that Dragonborn, former prisoner of an imperialist regime and possibly the reincarnation of Lordran, god of humanity, would be against the will of the gods. But the Undead is also trying to save humanity by preventing the age of darkness that will come should the flame die out. So both see each other as the villain, while they're actually both heroes. It's kind of tragic really, especially when all of the Undead's effort proved to be for naught, permanently. I might even say that this might be the best fight setup right next to Homelander. And in this one the combatants don't even talk to each other before clashing swords. Speaking of, maybe let's get into the actual fight now, yes? Now, given the sheer amount of equipment and powers both warriors have, you'd think that creativity would have to be a #1 priority here. And I'm very happy to say that in this fight it very much was. Dragonborn gets their sword, bow, unrelenting force, dragon summoning, storm channeling, time dilation, fire manipulation, and soul tearing. While Undead gets their sword, hammer, dragon killing bow, resurrection, spell stopping and muting, lightning grabbing, undying endurance, becomes a fire hurricane, and they both end up using the ultimate swords, interestingly with the sun-moon contrast, but more on that later. In general, I think the choreography, animation and sound effects are all really well done. I've seen some say it's clunky, others say that it is but it fits both games. I personally didn't see much that troubled me. What I did see was a fight that constantly kept me on the edge of my seat, but not without some light-hearted moments, again, perfectly matching both series. Some memes are brought up in fun ways, like the hilariously effective combat roll and career-ending arrow to the knee. Speaking of reaction, the sheer emotion that Dovahkiin conveys when their first radar gets muted is some really neat animation in my view. They could have perfectly had them just react with shock, but instead they do it, test their throat, show it doesn't work, immediately tries to think another way to deal with the fight as their opponent charges, and I think this is a good moment to talk about some things. The score. Fireborn, obviously named after the bonfire and Dragonborn, is appropriate enough pure fire, from start to finish. Unlike in the predecessor, it never gets epic, because this track is epic in its very essence. The lyrics match both warriors perfectly, as does the overall style, and the a cappella version somehow manages to be just as amazing. I'm not kidding, listening to this is an experience. Top 5 musical tracks in the series easily. This was accomplished by Brendan Yates, longtime Death Battle composer, responsible for the best tracks in the series, even doing musical commission for hypothetical episodes, which I was very glad to see highlighted in his sponsor, and a choir made of press-selected Death Battle fans, whom I have all indeed done a work for the ages. Dragonborn vs Chosen Undead is also the one matchup that Death Battle writer Liam Swan has been wanting since he was a fan of the show in high school. And he even gets to voice the normally silent Undead with a line that references a tagline in the very first game. The moment in question involves the Undead being stabbed by a weapon specifically designed to kill its kind, then push themselves through it to get to their opponent, love when that happens, as he tries to choke out the shit out of the shouting warrior from Fuzro dying ever again. This moment is to raw gestures what alternative art you find nothing there is the raw comebacks. It also perfectly captures the themes of resilience and determination that Undead thematically embodies in this battle, whereas Dragonborn is the unstoppable attacker. It also makes Dovahkiin realize that the vow of silence is no longer active, making them tell the Undead to fall off. All of this to say that this episode is undisputedly a passion project that throws a lot of love towards the DB crew and fandom. But unfortunately the same can be said for Jocelyn voice actress, who was left uncredited in the end credits. I'm sure it was just an oversight though. The death itself I believe carries more weight in the implication rather than the deed itself, which involves Shadowborn snapping out the first frame one big Fusroda, and in the Undead cycle of life and death before collapsing, showing that the Undead did put them on edge though, as an olive branch to the DS fans. While darkness consumes everything, we hear Kat rejoicing in the age of darkness that Dovahkiin just unleashed.
Let true dark be cast upon the world. Our Lord hath returned.
Much like the previous episode, what was the theme for this one, narratively speaking? Well, there's a lot of similarities between these two already, and a few obvious contrasts as well. Viking vs night, sun vs moon, snow vs fire, fun power fantasy vs tragic powerlessness in the face of cosmic horror. I think that last part says it all. You see, Dragonborn vs Chosen Undead is a battle between an unstoppable force versus an immovable object. While both combatants are godlike in nature, with Dragonborn being capable of slaying an existing divine dragon, and Chosen having a soul strong enough to stoke fires of creation, the power gap between them is far too large for the Chosen to keep going eternally, as their will is very much limited. Limit is a keyword here. As you probably got the idea by now, Skyrim is not only the winning franchise here, but also the sillier of the two. This is far from the first time it happened in this show, where the more out there character in tone ends up being the more out there in power as well. That's because the more grounded a setting is, even just by comparison, the more limits they have, but comedy intrinsically works by exaggeration, hence is much more loose on limits. Chosen Undead, as much as it can potentially resurrect from the dead, comes from a setting where pretty much all is already lost, all is in the hands of gods, and even immortality is bound to a limited will and sanity. But Dragonborn, as previously said, is a power fantasy, where arguably you are the god, exploring very much a live world with all kinds of cultures, powers, mods, and even a limitless energy bar. While neither combatant has personality per se, at least Chosen Undead is explicitly characterized to the ship with power and tenacity. Dragonborn, by comparison, is just power move after power move, less about who they are as people and more what they can do. Kinda like a Doomsday in a way, more power than personality. It's very fitting that the end gag frames Dragonborn as the boss that a Dark Souls player will rage over, because by taking part in this fight, Chosen Undead ultimately chose death. Once again, the ending is much more about lore rather than numbers, exploring the sheer power gap between Dragonborn and Chosen Undead on a cosmological scale, with a nice Hercules callback to boot. All around, I say that this episode is as close as it gets for a 10 out of 10 to me. It's epic, larger than life, just captivating all around. Legends will speak of this day indeed. Next time is something I really want to talk about. I've seen some call it obscure when it was first revealed, and I mean, it's no Marvel vs DC and it might be another one out in this season of popular matchups, but come on, even I have heard of Killua at some point. You're telling me that Gorn was Deku's most popular opponent, but Gorn's best friend is the obscure one? Come on. I know that some are ready to skip this battle entirely, but guys, like, the reason why we got the same series finale last season was because anything that's not mainstream isn't rewarded. Many got into different series because of that battle highlighting them. So a little as may matter, please support this episode when it drops. That's the only way that we can get more variety and obscure characters in this series. It's gonna be a battle of intergalactic prodigies, and I'm very much looking forward to it. I'm Uncle Krypton, I hope I made your day slightly better.